But you got to win the midterms, because if we don't win the midterms, it's just going to be, I mean, they'll find a reason to impeach me. I'll get impeached. We don't impeach them. You know why? Because they're meaner than we are. We should have impeached Joe Biden for 100 different things.
That's right. We should have impeached Joe Biden for 100 different things. Hey, everybody, I'm Ann Vandersteel, and we are live today. It is Wednesday, March 11th. And yeah, you guys, the Americans out there in the real world, we have been told that our elections are the most secure in the world. I roll my eyes. But if that's true, why are we still talking about these elections like they're the ugly baby of the American family? Why do millions of Americans no longer trust our elections? Why did the rules change overnight in 2020? Why did the counting stop in the middle of the night? And why do the same people who tell us fraud never happens also tell us we're not allowed to ask questions? Well, this afternoon, we're going to be talking to a friend of mine, somebody who I have the utmost of respect for, somebody who has made a name for himself in election integrity. He's a man who approaches elections the way a military intelligence officer actually would approach a battlefield. Seth Keshel. His studies, he has actually studied voter registration data, demographic movement, and county level voting patterns. His conclusions? Well, if you want to understand elections, stop looking at the polls. Look at the data. Look at the system. And look who controls the counting. Because Americans can't trust our elections, which frankly we can't. And I don't think anybody should have trusted the midterms at this. I'm sorry, some of the primaries that have gone on for the midterms that we have coming up. How do we even trust the government that comes from this? Do you trust the government you got? Do you think you're getting the government you voted for? That's why this fight has mattered. Seth Keshel is a former U.S. Army intelligence officer who has served in Afghanistan and later became one of the most recognized election data analysts in the country. His unique approach applies military intelligence methodology to election forecasting. He's analyzing voter registration trends, demographic shifts, and geographic voting patterns. His work gained national attention after accurately forecasting multiple state election outcomes. He's the author of The American War on Election Corruption, a book that examines the vulnerabilities of modern election systems and proposes strategies to restore trust in America. Seth, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. It is always good to have a friendly on the show.
And it's been a minute, but we've all been trying to save the world for so many years now, and I appreciate you having me back on. And hello to Ann's audience; it's good to see you again.
Yeah, Seth, you have. I remember meeting you years ago in Tampa at an event where we were sort of sequestered. I want to say blindfolded and thrown on a bus where we got to collaborate together. And you haven't stopped. I mean, a lot of us have gone off, and I cover a lot of different news subjects. So, I haven't been primarily focused on elections like you have, but I've covered it because it's something that is still not addressed. It's very worrisome to me. But in the end, you have gone on and become an expert, somebody that I think people around the country respect, including the president. You've written a book about it. It is a bestseller. Look at this, The American War on Election Corruption. You've got an Amazon #1 bestseller, and this book only just launched. What first of all, went through your brain when you decided to tackle this subject into a book form? Because it's a monster subject, and people have a lot of misunderstandings about election integrity.
So the book just sort of happened. I have always been asked, I've got the best-selling Substack out there. It's captaink.us. And people like to follow along because I provide actionable information, actionable intelligence on current events and on things that people care about the most. It's timely. Right now, I'm putting out about 3 articles a week, and my subscribers care about forecasting. They care more than anything about getting around the ridiculous efforts of the mainstream media to deceive and promote only their viewpoints, which has extended to elections. So at the end of August, a friend of mine named Larry Schweikert, who's a historian and a former professor, who's written, by the way, for your homeschool crowd out there, the Patriots Guide to the History of the United States. It's an essential item for your homeschools, for your bookshelf. And Larry was talking to a publisher, and we were discussing the way I forecast elections, or Larry and the publisher were. And he asked Larry, that publisher did, if I had a book in me. And I'd always told people previously when they asked if I was going to write a book that I didn't think that it was time to write a book, that I didn't think I'd reached the point in my life or in
Mhm.
my story in which I needed to put a punctuation mark and move to another chapter. But it just so seemed that with Trump back in office and election integrity back on the hot seat, so to speak, that the time was there to recount lessons from the previous 3 election cycles, especially, and understand how it is that elections have changed from something that was easily predictable and understandable to this game. It's just a game of ballot collection in most of the states at this point, where the voice of the voter is no longer relevant. So that was where the idea for the book, The American War on Election Corruption, came from. And
Mhm.
it's taken on a life of its own. But writing a book is a challenge. It's something that I did not expect to be as challenging as it was. And I'm somebody that has a pretty high acumen for writing.
Yes, you do. Your Substack is on fire, and I think you found sort of not want to say your hidden talent, something that I didn't think you knew you could exploit the way you have in a way to disseminate information. Which, as we were talking off camera, what I love about this book is that you humanized it. It isn't a bunch of statistics and whodunits. It's really you personalize it. You bring a lot of your personal story into the book. So for for the average person who just goes, well, did we win or not? And did they steal it or not? I guess I want to see the data, but it's kind of like they don't care because it gets too technical in some aspects and it's too complicated. It seems like it never gets solved. But you present the information in such a way that you bring people into who you are, and you sort of become, I don't want to say the superhero in the book because you don't portray yourself as such, but to me, because you digest the data and you present it in a way for the layperson, you are a superhero because this is a topic that most people go, oh, this is just, status quo. They're going to steal it. They're going to steal it. You actually have some approaches that I believe that we're going to talk about a little bit later on. But I want to talk about your intelligence officer background because you actually approach this whole election integrity and election thievery like an intelligence officer approaches a battlefield. Where did that mindset come from? Why did you decide to apply your background into this domain?
I think that the hand of God has steered my life to be what it was supposed to be,
Wow.
and that includes a lot of low points. And when if you say that I portrayed myself like a superhero, I think that what I really wanted to drive home first and foremost was that you don't have to be who you were when you started. Life is
Right.
this constantly changing um, evolution, in a good way to say that word, into what you're supposed to be. Now, I was a kid that had the same brain then that I have now, that was able to discern things out of numbers that other people just couldn't see. I love statistics in baseball, and that's why the game baseball is my favorite sport. My dad and I grew up going to games with my dad, watching MLB games, enjoying the pursuits of all the historic records. I saw Mark McGwire in person hit his 70th home run in 1998. Of course, that was artificially inflated, but the that was never translatable for me onto success in the field. I was not a graceful kid growing up. I grew really fast, had a lot of ear problems, and I was not able to play at a high level. And as I went through high school and college, I was working for my baseball teams because of the stat brain that I had, and really wanted to work in the game of baseball. In college, I was part of the Ole Miss baseball program as a stats guy, and never could catch on because those jobs were really full of former player types. So I wound up going in Army ROTC, wanted to be a military intelligence officer, and it's not all James Bond work, by the way, and wound
Yeah.
up going the hard way to getting reclassified into intelligence after I was first supposed to be an artillery officer. And my job was very much like I have it today, seeing the battlefield from a 30,000-foot view, looking at strategic ways to solve problems. And that was our job as part of an aviation brigade in Afghanistan, was to understand that in a way that supported local forces, coalition forces, Afghan National Police, Afghan National Army, and then condense all this information, data and information, statistics, into intelligence that would aid operations, keep our soldiers safe, and help with offensive missions. And that gave me the ability to understand 3,143 counties and independent cities in the United States, how they relate one to another, and what is the
Mhm.
best way to start unwinding the problem. Because the problem ultimately can be defined as the American people don't trust the elections process. And
Right.
we can separate President Trump from that. That's a lot of people that don't like the president. They say, well, what does it matter? You know, the big orange man is in there. They don't seem to understand that the constitutional republic itself, which is one of your major lines of effort in your world, you know, talking
Yeah.
about rights, talking about sovereignty of citizens. And if you don't have faith that the process of self-government is even tenable, um, then you really don't have much of a foundation.
You're right. You're right. You argue, in trying to look through the, see the forest through the trees at that 30,000-foot view. You actually argue that voter registration is a far better predictor than polling. Why do you say that?
It signals intent. Polling is, it's not completely useless. I will look at polls if they're about topics or sentiment. What do you think about the military effort in Iran? What do you think about this, about abortion? What do you think about, the percentage of people that think elections are corrupt, which by the way got as high as 2/3 of the public in the Biden years. So polling for candidates, though, you have a lot of issues. Number one, the sponsor for the poll is going to pretty much say, I need this poll to show my guy close. So if it's a real big underdog campaign and they can't win, they're going to try and show you internal polls that are like, man, we're 3 points off, so send us some money. And then, of course, if you've got the favorite campaign, they might show blowout margins to discourage the opposition. And then the mainstream media in the Trump years has done everything they can to show the swing states is unplayable, so the Trump folks don't show up and vote at all. So polls can be used to manipulate like that. And then even when they're conducted by honest people, there's still a margin of error because the way that the interviews are done, the way that the models are put together, that is a long way off. So if I've got a 3% margin of error, which is what I'm
Right.
saying, if I'm within 3 points of the final result, I'm technically correct. Well, 3 points in Pennsylvania is over 200,000 votes. So my model can spot votes of margin based on the way they trend one to another, and 200,000 votes is a lot of votes to miss. So polling on candidate races, number one, is prone to bias and rigging. And then number two, there's just legitimate errors now that because of the way people exist and communicate with one another or access information, it's less accurate than ever before. Everyone used to have a landline, but now I might not be able to get this under 49 demographic on a landline or by email. They don't answer texts from strangers, so you might be
Right.
missing a lot of the equation. So the voter registration, though, when I look at the change in voter registration, so if I look from 2020 to 2024 in every state except Colorado, of course, is trending more Republican than it was in 2020 or less Democrat, then that is an active sign that the current administration, which was Biden at the time, is losing ground with voter registration and the sentiments of voters. And he only won by 42,918 votes over 3 states. Otherwise, it would have been a tied electoral college. So that's the way. Florida was R +8, Republican +8% when Trump won it in 2024. Now it's over 11 points. That is showing you that the people that are registering to vote are overwhelmingly more Republican. So I would expect a larger Republican margin in the next presidential election. Over time, voter registration tells you, because a new registration is, hey, I am on board with MAGA, right? So that's somebody
Right.
registering now as a MAGA voter if they're registering Republican. They're not going to go register old school McCain Republican hoping it goes back. They'll just go register Dem or Independent.
So how did the structural changes in 2020, how how should I say, I guess the correct phraseology would, what structural changes in 2020 created the biggest vulnerabilities? And how did that expansion of what President Trump lamented about forever, the mail-in voting, affect election administration?
So there is a long-term approach to rigging elections. And one of the reasons I had Newt Gingrich write the forward. I've had people on the grassroots will say, why would you get a Republican old guard to write your forward? Well, I want this book to penetrate past people that already agree with me. And Newt does believe the truth about elections. And one thing he said that I found particularly interesting was that elections aren't stolen, they're rigged. And I think I agree with that because the laws of the various states are very predictive for which party that state will support presidentially. Automatic voter registration, universal mail-in voting, ballot harvesting. So those have been being laid down in the laws for about a decade now, starting with automatic registration. Universal mail-in voting started to take root really at the beginning of the century, but only in a couple states. 4 more states jumped on board with that in 2020. And then even those who did not permanently jump on board with universal mail-in voting jumped in and made almost an all-mail election, like New Jersey, for instance.
Right.
Or you had Michigan going from 24% in 2016 mail-in ballots to 49% in 2020. You had a 634% increase in mail-in ballots from 2016 to 2020 in Georgia. So in the long run, they're rigging elections in the law, making the states very difficult to win in every election from here on out. But in the short run in 2020, with Trump on his way to re-election in March of 2020, then there had to be some special changes to make this faster. And that was where you have the changes on the fly to how many mail-in ballots are going to be out, extensions of early voting, everything
Right.
that could be done to put the foot on the scale. And the margin was still 42,918 votes in Wisconsin, Arizona, and Georgia.
Amazing. You can just cite these numbers off the top of your head. I can't even remember my parents' phone number. So
That's the Rain Man, you know?
it is, man. You are the Rain Man. Exactly. Judge Wapner at 4. Judge Wapner at 4. Let's pull the onion. Let's pull the lens back. Let's look globally, because in the book you actually talk about election fraud not being new in America. What are the most significant historical examples people should know about? Because we've heard stories about CIA, color revolution, 72 countries, 20 years of overthrowing governments and putting our puppets in there. Is there anything that totally surprised you? You were in Afghanistan, fought wars over there.
The thing that really hit home hard for me was when I was researching. There's a lot of research in the book. This is not a rant or a event post. I wanted this to be. You have to connect with the audience when you're. I'm known in election circles. I'm known in the grassroots, but I'll do shows in the mainstream sometimes. Where the first time I went on Sean Spicer's show, it's like everybody's like, "Well, who's this guy?" You know. But we've both stood on the stage at Clay's events and had thousands of people being like, "We know who this guy is."
Right.
So the moral of the story, it's a really big ocean out there.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people. And so when we ask ourselves, well, why do people think this way or vote this way? There's a lot of people. And most people aren't that political, or they become political around election time. So Afghanistan in 2010 had elections. And that was a complete disaster. I mean, you had more than a quarter of the ballots that were bad ballots, fraudulent ballots, yet we still stuck the stamp of approval on it and moved on. So 10 years before the Trump Biden election, our country basically put the thumbs up to a fraudulent election in Afghanistan. And that was the year I was over there. So recounting what happened with when our government refused to hear any sort of claims, any sort of evidence about the 2020 election, which I don't think was our first big bad election. It was the one where we lost one of the more notable figures in human history in an election. But I think that the experience in Afghanistan with my experience in 2020 really animated me to want to put an end to this, because I think that it's a very frustrating thing that we are living under what is pretty much an autopilot government, whether we have Trump in there or not. Look at the Senate right now with the SAVE Act. I am not quick to be angry about things people are disappointed with the current administration. I have a long-term approach to this, and I can find the silver linings and the gold in things that a lot of people get frustrated about. Sometimes people criticize me for being you're a sunshine pumper, but the point is, my focus has been elections. It remains elections. I believe a lot of things about elections that I really don't even need to put in the book, because I'm trying to make the elementary case too. So everybody that's listening here, your grandma that's been Republican for 60 years that doesn't like the way Trump sounds, will find a lot to chew on in my book.
Great. So why is there such, when you start questioning elections, is the systems actually that, run the elections, why does it generate such in total and intense pushback, even from our own side?
So the Democrats, of course, are going to push back on any claims that Joe Biden didn't beat Donald Trump. Donald
Of
Trump is
course.
the biggest villain in the history of their world. And now he's replaced George W. Bush, which is very interesting, because I remember being in college and listening to, this is the infancy of the internet age, when you could go comment on articles or comment on social media.
Sure.
And 2006, 2007, 2008, everybody and their mother was piling onto Bush. And I wasn't nearly as into politics then as I am now. And we didn't have as much information then as we do now too. But you can see that they've changed places, where now Trump is the big bad boogeyman. And I suspect the next time we have a different Republican president, this could be JD Vance, Marco Rubio, or God forbid the Dems wind up in the White House in 2029, some point in the 2030s, we'll have another Republican president. And if the way things are going now, we're going to have like a Franco run for the Republican Party one day, and that'll really make these Dems wonder how much they miss Donald Trump. But it is a derangement. It's a psychological condition. I believe that a lot of people sit online and become brainwashed. This is why
True.
I caution everybody to be careful about their algorithm. I just recently started posting on X again, which I'm not a big fan of, but I think it would be stupid to come out with a #1 bestseller and not use every ounce of your social media to push the book. Just
Right.
being honest here.
No,
But
it's true.
but in November, I was poking around on X, and this was when Ole Miss's football coach Lane Kiffin was about to ditch the program. I went to Ole Miss, so I was interested. He was about to ditch a playoff team that went deep into the playoffs, almost made it to the national title game, and he wound up being hired by LSU. But I spent a couple hours poking around one afternoon with coaching news, and within a couple hours, X decided I was no longer interested in anything political and populated my
Yep.
entire feed with college football stuff.
I,
So
I,
the
I know.
people that get stuck in with the indigestion, poking around in all the black pills, that's what happens is the algorithm populates you with nothing but black pills. And my take on things is that, and this isn't to say there's not legitimate criticism that should be levied. There's always
Right.
is, and good leaders actually accept good, constructive criticism. However, the attacks on Trump from the left have failed for 10 years. So the only approach to take now is to attack Trump from the right. So I think a lot of the attacks from Trump on the right, some of them are sincere, and they're grounded in, like, here's a good one. You said you'd focus more on domestic policy than foreign. That is fair. Okay, but to extend that all the way to the deepest conspiracies regarding every action. Look, I can make a case for what's going on in Iran without diving into the conspiracy theories, because Iran and Venezuela are essential to China's dominance in the rest of this century. Right now,
Right. Energy,
the
correct.
question is not whether we should have grabbed Maduro or whether we should blow up Iran. The question is, do we stick conventional forces in here for the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years? That's what people don't want, and fear is
Right.
driving the anxiety here. But so far, I mean, I think that the coalition is probably on pace to neutralize Iran and create the peaceful conditions for the Middle East, which will prohibit future endless wars from future presidents. But it's a difficult world out there. I think that X is brainwashing people in a way, maybe not willingly, but it is. It's you gotta inform your own mind and be able to explain your own positions.
All right. So I want to get your expressed help on educating Americans in terms of what they must do to help garner a real election integrity, where we feel that we could not feel that we know we can trust our elections and that we're part of the process. I mean, do we need to, talk to me about citizen election oversight, what it means to have integrity in voter registration, in other words, clean voter rolls, counting, et cetera. Walk us through what we should be doing, because everybody, local action, national impact, General Flynn, you can be a poll watcher, you can do a lot of things to facilitate election integrity and also call it out when there isn't any integrity, like pizza boxes up on the windows and you can't watch them counting votes, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Exactly. So first thing people need to square is that all throughout human history, people in power have done everything possible to stay in power. And in the old days, when a new king would take over, they would put to the sword everyone from the previous ruler and his family. And the development of suffrage and people voting was supposed to offset this violence and fighting it all out in the street. So we have a right to free and fair elections, and one fraudulent vote cancels out one legal vote. So we need to understand that it is natural to expect people to do anything they can to rig the system to win. And if they can do it quietly without being caught, that is the goal. So right now, the way to do that is by messing with the laws. Why is it that Florida criminalizes ballot harvesting as a felony? But you have other states where it's Nevada, it's wide open, Wild West, where you can harvest as many ballots as you want, and it counts.
Hmm.
So we have something that is a problem waiting to be fixed and needs to be fixed, where the states are writing on the elections clause of the Constitution, where they can make their own laws on elections. However, the feds have power too. And Ken Paxton's case in 2020, Texas versus Pennsylvania, came out when Trump was still in office, was the best case for this, where he said his office alleged that Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, their miscarriage of their own election laws disenfranchised Texas's 38 electors. Naturally, the Supreme Court said that they don't have standing and threw it out. 20 other states joined that lawsuit and it just got tossed. When you had so many, even 44% of Americans in November 2020 thought the election was stolen. So it wasn't an insignificant number. Now, thanks to election integrity folks, that number got way up there over 60% eventually, and with Biden's own incompetence. So people have to understand the way that the elections are corrupted. Whether you believe more in a machine heavy theory, which a lot of our
Hmm.
friends do, or you're more into the mail in ballot stuff, which I am, then they all stem from the corruption of the voter roll, which
Right.
ties very neatly into all the Somali fraud that you're seeing, because it has to do with personnel, has to do with data. Same thing you see with the way the Democrats, I mean, even some Republicans use smurfing to raise $1 from this guy, $1 from that guy, and you have to see where it originates from. And the problem here is that there's not much justice to be found in the court systems, and people clean out dead, like this comment that just came across. You've got dead voters being removed and then added right back in, or
Right.
you have processes that where you can submit bad registrations to the county at certain meetings, but they've already populated 100 more that are bad registrations by the time you get two off. So
Right.
it's like eating Oreos while brushing your teeth. But people are not engaged, and I will tell you that. And it's a frustrating thing, because the engagement that we have to have is a political engagement,
Yeah.
and people are black-pilled about politics in general. But I guarantee you, if we would have had the internet in 1787, politics was just as disgusting then as it is today. So we have less than half of precinct committee man spots filled all throughout Arizona for the Republican Party.
Is that a
All right,
structural vulnerability that is of most concern to you, or what would be the most concerning structural vulnerability?
what do you mean by structural vulnerability?
Well, precinct committeemen, I mean, poll watchers, the voter roll database. These are all
Mhm.
structural towards facilitating good and safe and clean
Right.
elections, right?
I guess to boil back down to my real ideology for solving problems. There's two ways to solve America's problems. One of them is violence. Okay. Now, for those of you who are watching that might want to try to write this up, this is not advocating for violence. This is
Right.
saying, like, no Christian or patriot should push for violence as your first resort for solving anything. You should be prepared for dealing with it, because it breaks out in all the Democrat run cities. But
Right.
the other option, which should be chosen, which is America's way of solving problems, is the political system, which is broken right now. But it works sometimes, because in the Texas primary, Steve Toth, who I know, good man, beat Dan Crenshaw by almost 20 points. Okay, and
Mhm.
got rid of Crenshaw, and Toth won a majority outright on primary night. So by a massive margin, the voters of that county, mostly Montgomery County, part of Harris County, ran Den Crenshaw out on a rail. So why does it work there, but it doesn't work in other places? Now, some of it is corruption of the law of the voting, but there's disengagement. You know, people that are upset about the Ken Paxton and John Cornyn situation, turnout was
Yeah.
extremely low. Now,
Yeah.
Cornyn hammered Paxton with 60 million in attack ads and damaged him significantly. So Paxton underran his polls by at least 6.5 points, if not more like 10 points. So now the president's in a tough decision, because Cornyn even won a bunch of rural counties in Texas. You wouldn't have sold me on Cornyn winning rural counties if there wasn't a lot of damage done. But people can't complain if they didn't go vote. And part of the voting, the blocking and tackling of elections, is getting out the vote, because you
Mhm.
and I are going to vote because we care and we're
That's
informed
right.
citizens. Right. But then you have other people that usually vote, and then you have people like that vote once in a blue moon. The Dems have figured out how to get the once in a blue moon vote out by harvesting their ballots passively, right? So they no longer need these people that care like they needed them to care for Obama and come out with 69 million votes way ahead of its time. So we have an engagement problem first and foremost before we complain about any of the corruption, because if the people that are upset about the outcomes aren't aren't willing to involve themselves, they're not willing to donate funds to good candidates. Well, let me tell you why good candidates don't run. I'm married to a great candidate who's an office holder, but we don't have a lot of money. We don't take big lobbyist funds because we don't want to be controlled. Rachel doesn't want to be controlled in her votes. So we're people funded, but we have a skinny war chest. And we have to be very careful about how we spend. Meanwhile, the Dems come in with massive funds. And they're going after our seat this year. So if people don't want to donate and people don't want to go knock doors, and the candidates are always busy putting up their own signs and knocking doors, look, then you're uh you're behind the power curve right away before we even start worrying about the corruption.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Did I lose you?
I'm still here.
Oh, okay, sorry. It sounded like I lost you for a second. I apologize. So, all right, Seth, let's dive into this book a little bit right now because there was a couple of things that stood out. If it's okay with you, I dog tagged them on my electronically since I have the Kindle version. I didn't have
Mhm.
time to get the hardcover or the paperback one before this interview. And I did read it. By the way, folks, I read this book in about a day and a half, not a full day. It wasn't like 18 hours. I probably read the book in about 5 hours. I broke it up and I read it on Kindle. It's a really good read. And like I said, it's easy to read because it's not just chock full of statistics and data points. It's actually humanizing it. And you actually talk about some people that are, good friends of mine and yours, General Flynn, your first contact with him in 2016 and later comms during the 2020 election aftermath. And I highlighted this right here. I had first messaged General Flynn on LinkedIn in June 2016, thanking him for his role in drawing needed attention to the Hillary Clinton email scandal, which foisted a major counterintelligence threat upon the country. Keshel then recounts Flynn's response, encouraging support for Trump. Flynn replied, quoted in the book is, I'd ask you to encourage people to vote for Trump. Our country needs fresh leadership. You then went on to message him in 2020, and this is what led to you collaborating with Patrick Byrne and Sidney Powell and others in General Flynn. Can you kind of give us sort of that history a little bit because it's really unique, frankly, and it set the tenor and the tone for what became the next 4, 5, 6 now whatever how many 6 years later of fighting for this quote election integrity.
For sure. Well, in 2016, I cared about politics. I was part of a Texas project called the Convention of States Project. I know a lot of good people in it. I know a lot of good people that oppose the Convention of States Project. But that was my first foray into Texas politics.
Yeah.
And I as a former intelligence officer, I admire General Flynn, and because, of course, the thing that people don't understand about General Flynn, with all their theories about the guy, is that yes, he was a Democrat. He was an Irish Catholic Democrat from New England. I actually
Right.
just met one. I just met one in a hotel last week in Phoenix who was from Boston, and talking to him, it's like, why are you not a Republican? But that's how they're raised up there. All right, and that's just how it is. And like, so what happens when a president needs to appoint a flag officer, so a general or an admiral, to a high post? He goes to his people and says, find me somebody for this position. And those people, of course, are going to prefer a person of their own party. Now, Obama got James Comey for the FBI, who was a quote Republican, right? But he's a
Mm,
member of the Uniparty. But typically,
yeah.
the president's going to find a Republican if he's a Republican president, and the Democrat's going to find a technical Democrat. My experience with General Flynn, even to this day, is he's not a political guy. He is not a political guy, and that is a credit. He's not really nose up in the political stuff, but so I don't think he voted a lot based on what he shared with me over the years. But either way, he came out on a list, and there's only so many 3-star officers that are available for an assignment right now. So a list might have gone to Obama with a couple of names on it. Okay, well, let's put him in. Obama, of course, warned Trump, don't hire Michael Flynn. So I think
Right.
that when General Flynn came out and said that ISIS is going to take over the Levant because of the way that we're running this thing, like, he was just calling balls and strikes fairly. I don't think that he
Mhm.
was read on to you need to be a political ass kisser, and do everything for the administration. So, bad bedside manner, like that's what intelligence officers do. Like, the job of an intelligence officer is to inform the commander to help him make his decisions on real information. So, if you don't want him to get mad at you, but you know that you're outnumbered 3-1 on the other side of that hill, and you get everybody killed, then you made a huge, grievous error that just caused major, widespread chaos. But I had a lot of respect for him for that. And I just sent that one message because it was, he was commenting a lot about Hillary's emails, and a lot of people up until Comey let her off the hook thought that was going to cripple her campaign.
That's
So,
exactly what we thought. I'll never
right.
forget where I was when I learned that he wasn't going to let it cripple her campaign. I was throwing things at the television. I'm so pissed.
So any green suitor, any military man who did what she did would never get out of prison. You'd be buried underneath Leavenworth prison. That is
Yeah, for
so
sure.
just if you walk out of a skiff in the military, you have so many cargo pockets on those uniforms. If you so much as walk out of a skiff with a printed out piece of classified information in your pocket on accident, and it gets found out, it is a significant emotional event. And it is a serious problem. There's an investigation into you, whether you should be able to keep your clearance. And then, of course, they're going to interrogate you to make sure that you don't have you weren't trying to leak information. That's if you make a mistake and walk out with information. So that is not taken lightly, but to set up your own server in your own bathroom, to process all this information. Look, even John Kerry said that when he was Secretary of State, he wrote every email expecting the Russians and the Chinese to read the email. So he would write his emails as if they were going to read it. So he would withhold
Yeah.
certain things and observe need to know. That's John Kerry. Okay,
Yeah.
so Hillary just had her own server that was accessed by anybody and everybody, which of course makes people wonder if she was selling secrets. But that was how I first contacted the general, and nothing moved for 4 years, and then I had this stuff going on with the 2020 election where I had my own research suggesting exactly where the cheating was occurring. And by the way, folks, 5.5 years later, all my stuff is proving right. So that was
Numbers don't lie, as they say.
right, it aged well. So the reason I reached out to him a second time was because I saw Sidney Powell all over the news, and she
Yep.
was talking about how, we're gonna unleash the Kraken.
Right.
We're gonna file all these lawsuits, and I knew that Flynn and Powell were tied together because of his cases, and
Right.
that's when I reached out and I hit him several times with stuff. And the reason I went there was because all the people at the Republican Party, county level and state level, didn't give a rat's ass.
That's right.
Some of them went on vacation the day after the election. I am not kidding. The day after, and didn't come back for air for a few more days. So that was how I strong armed my way into the election integrity movement.
Too big to rig. You talk about it. And we heard President Trump saying, we're going to make it too big to rig. You have a theory: massive turnout margins reduce the ability to manipulate outcomes, overwhelm the structural vulnerabilities. Do you think, being somebody who looks at the numbers and looking at all the registration, that we're going to have a similar turnout in terms of too big to rig? Or do you think we're still very much threatened because of the voter rolls and machines?
I do believe Trump was too big to rig in 2024. My analysis of the 2024 election. So after that election, I did a region by region, or in the case of certain states, singled out certain states, called the 2024 election compendium. And I evaluated every state, and all of my evaluations, whether it's about who's the greatest baseball player of all time, who's the greatest
Mm-hmm.
president of all time, or how did this election pan out, my rankings are relative one state to the next. That's how I do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I might call out, say that one state is green in my reviews, and somebody's going to email me and say, well, we found this and this and this, but it's like relative. So relative to other big states, Florida runs great elections. They don't run perfect elections, but they run good elections. So I went through all the data. Harris lagged Joe Biden in 44 states. So she had fewer votes than him in 44 states. In a couple of those, she was almost even with him, like Pennsylvania and Michigan. Out of the 6 states where she surpassed him, then only uh, four of them were battleground states. One of them was Maine, which had a ripped off congressional race, and Utah was the other, which is probably population growth. But
Mm-hmm.
she lagged him by 1.8 million votes in her own home state. Everyone knows that a presidential candidate has a home field advantage and performs better in their home state, but not Harris. So Trump finished 9 points better off in California than he did in 2020 without gaining votes. He had almost the same exact vote total in California in 2024 as he did in 20. Flipped most of Central California, flipped Imperial County in the Southeast. And of course, California being 1.8 million light for Harris was pivotal for Trump carrying the popular vote. So
Mm-hmm.
when you look at Illinois, California, Massachusetts, New York, Florida, and Texas, those massive 6 states, Harris was missing like 5 million of Biden's votes. So I think the play was go light on the total national ballot count. Try to win the electoral college and lose the popular vote. Then you're going to create a scenario where Harris wins the election, and then conservatives now want to get rid of the electoral college, which has to stay in place, especially now
Absolutely.
that the reapportionment is going to happen in 2030. So I think that the play was to
Wait,
overload
stop
the
one
swing
second. Stop
states.
1 second. Reapportionment. Explain that to my audience, because I
I
harp on the
can't hear you, man.
1949. Oh, you can't hear me? Can you hear me now? How about now? No? So strange. Let me do this.
You want me to log out and log back in?
No, I'm going to log out and log back in. I'll be right back. Just 1 second. I'm going to refresh. Okay, that should be good. Is that good?
I'll come back in.
No, I think it's me. Is that better?
Want me to come back in?
Yeah, you can try. I don't know what's going on. Yeah, go out and come back in. Sorry, folks. I don't know what's going on here. Hang on. We're going to figure it out. I'm not sure what's going on. Audio. Yep, it's working. Test, test, test. All right. Can you guys give me a thumbs up in the chat if you can hear me? Give me a thumbs up. Can you hear me now?
I hear you.
Okay. Oh, maybe it was on your end then. I'm sorry about that. Okay.
So where were
We were talking about too big to rig and the apportionment, and I said the 1929 Apportionment Act is a big issue for me. I talk about it all the time, how that was totally, we should never have done that. It's easy to buy 435 members of Congress, not so easy to buy 6,600 members if we actually had true apportionment. So the 2030 apportionment, tell me what that means to my audience, because I don't know if they know that.
So the Electoral College favored Republicans by 3 more electoral votes than it did in 2020. So Trump's 232 from the fraudulent 2020 election was worth 235 on the 2024 map. Now,
Okay.
the Census Bureau itself admitted that they botched the count. So they admitted that they undercounted mostly red states and overcounted mostly blue states. I redid the math on the trends for population, and my estimate suggests that the Dems are 12 to 16 electoral votes higher than they should be based on the population apportionments. And this is with
Is that a reflection of the illegals that have come in our country, or what is that a reflection
no.
of?
So first off, I am giving them the illegals, and even with the illegals, they're still 12 to 16 too high. All right. So if you took the illegals off, it would be even more than that. If you sent them back out, if you sent out 20 million or 25 million people. So the Dems are at least 12 to 16 electoral votes overrepresented, which is the size of Michigan or Georgia or North Carolina. So if the Dems lost their illegal alien population, that would probably double. So the Republicans would probably gain 25 or 30 House seats and electoral votes. So an electoral vote count. So if Texas has 38 electors, well, every state starts with 2 because they have 2 senators, and then however many the difference is how many House reps you had. So Texas had 38 in 2020, so that's 2 senators and 36 House reps. Well, they went up to 40 electoral votes, which is 2 senators and 38 House reps. Some states like Florida were squeezed. I think Florida only gained 1 electoral vote, and so 1 House rep. But theoretically speaking, if the population numbers are fixed and the census reapportionment and the reapportionment in 2030 will account for continued growth of places like Florida and Texas and Montana and Idaho, and they will be taking from Rhode Island or New York or California, you're going to swing the Electoral College, where the standard Republican presidential nominee might basically be starting an election with 250 electoral votes. So that's why the apportionment really matters, and that's also why the census is botching counts. The census director resigned in 2025 as soon as Trump was about to take over because he was going to have to own that mistake.
Wow. All right. Well, from your lips to the should we say the people in charge's ears, because I personally wish we would go back to what our Constitution called for. 1 representative for every 30,000 people. Do you think that's an unreasonable thing in today's electronic age when people were zooming in during COVID? Why can't we zoom in for Congress meetings? Why do we have to have the District of Corruption cesspool where the den of iniquity exists just so they can lure you into sleeping with children, all kinds of sick, disgusting debauchery that goes on there? Why not go back to 1 for every 30,000?
Well, I'm running some numbers right here, as I tend to do, Ann, and I'm coming up with 330 million divided by 30,000, and I get 11,000. So we would need
11,000.
we would
Okay.
need 11,000 House reps to have 1 for every 30,000 people. So I mean, we're up to our eyeballs with 435 House reps of corruption.
Wouldn't it be
Can you
easier?
imagine 11,000 bought off lobbyist mules?
Well, and that's what I was just going to suggest. Do you think it's reasonable to think they would be able to buy off 11,000 people versus 435 or 535? And should we
Yes.
not? You think
But
they'll still do it?
so New Hampshire has a state delegation like that where they've got hundreds of House members. So
Yeah,
it
the
is
largest state legislature. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that we'd be better off handling the corruption by I think term limits are necessary. There's a lot of
Absolutely.
these bread and butter conservatives out there that say, well, we do have term limits. They're called elections, and they're not factoring in the corruption of the election system, or the impact of big dollars. So you can literally buy your election these days, depending on the race. Not every election can you buy, but John Cornyn is still alive in the race today because he spent $60 million attacking Ken Paxton and getting out the vote and everything else. So um, this is actually an area where grassroots conservatives and grassroots Bernie bros connect because there is too much money in politics. I know it firsthand, being the first gentleman of my legislative district. So that's a big problem that we have. But if you run these folks out, I mean, what, 6 or 8 years in the U.S. House and maybe 2 terms in the Senate, done. I'm not going to say 1 term because you got to have some people with some seniority and continuity, and you have to have a leadership structure. But that's a major problem. The repeal of the 17th Amendment would be great,
Yes.
which allows for state
Yes.
legislatures to control folks like John Cornyn. But that's a heavy lift, and we're not anywhere near that on the Overton window, unfortunately.
Do you think that the state legislatures ultimately let's just say we drained DC and we actually got real elections and we put real people that actually cared about America in Congress and in the Senate? Do you still think that we need to adjust the same policies for election integrity to the state legislature? Because from where I'm sitting, they're just equally as corrupt, including my own Republican Party of Florida.
That's the ultimate chicken and the egg problem, where the states insist they have the laws in their favor to create their own election laws. And then the federal government, though, has to guarantee everyone a form of Republican government, right? Where you're not disenfranchised, where you have the right to a free and fair vote. So if your state's votes are blotted out by a state that pulls off all the stops to make sure their party wins the state. I mean, imagine it just theoretically. If a state legislature created laws in which New York City could vote for 8 weeks in a presidential election, but the upstate portion of New York only got 2 weeks. Right. Well, that would clearly be unfair, even if a Democrat majority and a Democrat court green lighted it. Right. Then you would have to have some degree of oversight. So the federal government exists for a reason, and that is to enforce the Constitution and administer justice. So we just, as conservative people, don't like the federal government because it's too big and it threatens too many liberties. And even when Republicans run it, it's still not a leaned out version of something that stays out of your life. So there is a role for the federal government to come in with lawfare and smash the corrupted elections, mail-in voting, automatic voter registration. We have voters in Seattle that are probably liberals going to the press with their 16 ballots. And of course, I reached out to one of them to get an interview for my book. And this woman had been long gone, probably told to shut the hell up. But states are disenfranchising other states with the way they run elections. There's very rarely been a period in American history in which you have a massive block of 18 states that never changes the way they vote. And now here we are.
And here we are.
So we start the election with in a major hole. I mean, the Republicans in 2016, other than Trump, were trying to win the George W. Bush map, which was worth 285 electoral votes with no margin for error.
That's right.
So Trump flipped the Midwest and gave them some more life.
Here's the $64,000 question, the SAVE Act. And this is just fresh off Politico today. There's plenty of articles coming out about it, but it's looking a little bleak, Seth. What is your feel on SAVE Act? Is it worth passing? Can we pass it? If not, it goes back to the people, doesn't it?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to get through. And I figured that there was a chance it would happen. So Trump has Cornyn by the balls if he wants to. He just simply go to the Senate. Is how bad do you really want this guy here? Because Senator Thune was saying that he really wanted Trump to endorse Cornyn. Well, that's not a really good endorsement. And even if it were to happen for political reasons in which we could understand, it still sucks. But I would say that, yes, if you got the SAVE Act, it would be worth suffering another 6 years of a weak senator. He only has so much power and influence. But there is we should probably have more than 60 Republican senators out there if you fix the 2020, 22, and 24 elections. I think my count was 62 at minimum. But you would still have people playing games. You'd have a few people not wanting to get it across, and they would say that we don't have 60 votes. So I'm wondering if we even had 85 Republican senators, if they would figure out a way to not pass legislation people want. Save America Act is an 85 to 15 issue. Like this is not a contentious topic. So now, of course, they're doing the same thing our courts did, relying on the fine language and saying, well, we don't want to override the tradition of the filibuster. Here's a newsflash. The next time the Democrats have the presidency, the House, and the Senate, they will get rid of the filibuster. And the only reason they didn't the last time they had the Senate was because Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin didn't want to get rid of the filibuster, and they're not in the Senate anymore.
You took a lot of personal attacks. We all did during the, shall we say, the disillusionment of 2020. you had a lot of reputational risk and you faced a lot of pressure and isolation during your analysis of 2020. How did you overcome that? And, to give you the strength to be here today. I mean, you had a lot of personal challenges. And I think the fact you're able to get this book out is testimony to who you are. But what was it that was the guiding force for you through all that?
There's a lot of names that I remember when I go through my phone or look through Telegram that were around in 2021 that aren't around anymore. And not necessarily a criticism, but once you get out in the world where you have a prominent voice, I don't like the term influencer. I think that there's good and bad.
I agree. I think it's gross.
I think
Agree.
there's good. I think there's good and bad people that somebody could call an influencer. Nobody can define. Somebody with 1,000 followers an influencer. I don't really know. I think some people have monetized X to where they put out negative news all the time, to be collecting ad revenues and not worry about getting information. But once you become a quote influencer or you become somebody with a big following, it's not so easy to go back into the corporate ladder, because then you have a big name on you. Then the first liberal that figures out where you're working is going to run to your management. In my case, I had a big article written about me and others, including General Flynn, by Reuters, and I thought it was really cool to be included in that
Rooter.
Yeah, and then 2 weeks later, on a random Tuesday afternoon, I got canned at the beginning of the year. So it's difficult for people that go behind a microphone like you, travel around, write books, get in the crosshairs of the media to sustain meaningful careers, especially if they're young and they have to make a living.
You become marked with a letter or a quad S, as in my case.
So I guess the good news is once your raft gets pushed out in the middle of the ocean, you got nowhere else to go.
Right.
And kind of like Zachary Mayo and Officer and a Gentleman, I got nowhere else to go. So early 2022, life was difficult, a lot going on in life. I didn't really have anywhere else to go but straightforward. And I think that seeing through the mission that you believe in, having faith, that God is going to take care of you and give you what you need to get through and stick it out. Look, in that what I used to say all the time, if not you, then who? That's a true story. Like, if somebody's not going to stand up, then we're going to suffer. Like, people sit here and hope it all changes, but I can sit here all day long and wish I could bench press 400 pounds. But unless I go out in my gym and I lift weights all the time and I eat right and I sleep right and I do my training, prayers, and vitamins, brother, to quote Hulk Hogan, then I ain't going to be able to lift that weight. Or if I'm 400 pounds and I want to drop weight and I don't get out and walk and watch what I eat, then I ain't going to happen. So if you want better outcomes and you're in journalism like you, but you don't want to take a tough stance, or you don't want to speak truth, or you don't want to have a controversial guest on, that you're not going to move the needle, and if you're in elections and you just want to leave good enough alone, and if you're in politics and you don't have precinct committeemen stepping up, going to knock on doors, having events to talk to your neighbors, then you can expect poor political outcomes. And that's really where we are. And a lot of it is conspiracy, and a lot of it is corruption, but a lot of it is look in the mirror. We have a lot of problems that are self-inflicted.
We absolutely do, Seth. We absolutely do. I just want to address Michelle Swinnick's in the chat. She's, been an advocate for somebody that says, the states, and I'm paraphrasing Michelle, so please forgive me if I don't get it 100% in your language, but that the states didn't follow the election statutes, and that was proven over and over. She did so many FOIAs and all this stuff, and she was like a dog with a chew toy for years on this subject, and called a lot of people out because Trump won in Arizona, but Kari Lake didn't. And there was a massive ballot discrepancy. I think she put 130,000 in here. Her ballots were rejected. But
well, look, she's right about that. Wisconsin has good laws on the books.
Yeah,
they don't follow them. So she's just
what should we do with those states that do this? Because we could go to paper ballots, and then we could find out that they're putting pizza boxes on the windows again, and they're lying about the count and whatever, on and on and on. So what do we do with these people? Should they be hung, executed, what? Because they're stealing.
Michelle should not be hung.
No, not Michelle.
No, I know. Look, Michelle is yet another long line of people in Arizona that's been front and center of elections. Arizona is ground zero symbolically for the 2020 election, despite all the other problem states. Maybe Georgia probably try to challenge for the title, but she's right about that. Getting people to follow the laws is difficult. Right now, we got a huge fight in this state between the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors and the recorder, Justin Heap. Justin Heap's a good guy. Served in the legislature with my wife. He's being really hamstrung from being able to do his job. But we have to. So the book, ultimately, to bring it full circle, is we got to wrap this thing up, I think. But I put the book out not for royalties. Obviously, I hope I make them. and make my life easier. But the point is, I want this to be able to get beyond the grassroots and into the mainstream. And
Right.
it's an area we've allowed the left to command the information space for. So that was the purpose of the book. It makes it simple for everybody to understand, pretty much what Michelle just said. You have people avoiding laws, making new laws, and that creates the corruption. There are other states that have good laws that have less vectors to cheat the elections, and therefore you
Right.
get better results.
That's exactly right. It takes people with I don't know, public service in their heart and honesty and integrity to actually facilitate elections, because like you said, you can have good laws in the books, but they don't follow them, you're not going to get a good outcome. Seth Keshel, you have got an Amazon #1 bestseller on the market right now, and folks, you can go to Amazon. In fact, here it is. If you want to go to Amazon, pick up a copy of this book, the American War on Election Corruption. This is a fantastic read. I read it, like I said, it took me a day and a half and, probably about 5 hours altogether. I got it on Kindle, and it's a fabulous read. He adds a lot of personal touch in there, but he explains this in great detail, and it's not painful to read. It's actually an entertaining read because Seth is a brilliant writer and he's entertaining. So if you like what you heard here today, I encourage you to get a copy of it immediately and share it out with your friends. We've got to engage America. This is our country, and it's our country to give away. And our constitutional republic has been smothered by some bad people, and we got to extricate them quickly. Seth Keshel, thank you as always. And I appreciate you taking a little bit of time with me today.
You bet, Ann. I'll be looking for your review on Amazon so they don't get bombed by the liberals.
I'll get right on that.
Thank you.
All right, Seth, take it easy. Say hi to your beautiful wife.
Will do. Okay, bye.
Bye. All right, folks, what an awesome opportunity to have Seth join us today. Election integrity, it's not a Republican issue, in case you were wondering. It's not even a Democrat issue, although probably most of my audience would argue we don't have D's and R's, we have a uniparty. But it's an American issue. So without trust in elections, the entire foundation of our beautiful country begins to crack. You guys know that the right to vote only matters if the vote is counted honestly. How long have we been screaming about this? If we're told that we're not allowed to ask questions about the process, that frankly should be a massive red flag and should concern everybody. If you see pizza boxes going up on the windows while they're counting paper ballots, definitely have a throwdown. Seth Keshel's work reminds us of something very simple, because he calls for citizen involvement, transparency, strict election procedures, accountability mechanisms, and the election integrity determines the survival of our republic. That much is really clear. If you guys want freedom, we got to have transparency. And that fight for honest elections may be the most important battle that we face in our lifetime. You guys have been awesome. Thank you so much. I want to remind everybody, we have a book out, CPS Pipeline. You can go to Amazon also and pick up a copy of our book, CPS Pipeline, State Sanctioned Kidnapping. We're going to do a show on this in the near future. We're going to break this down. But for those parents who've been challenged with CPS, if you haven't been challenged with CPS, but you know people who have, this book is for you. It walks you through in painstaking detail what you need to know, what has happened, and we offer some solutions for what you can do to prevent CPS from ever being a problem in your life. Thank you so much for tuning in. You guys have a great day.
Food security or food sovereignty. Every time we buy food, we choose. Glyphosate exposure is exploding. And people are asking, why is food so expensive? This is why we do what we do. Organic fields, thriving orchards, the purest ingredients straight from the earth. From our farms to your family. We do the testing so you don't have to. You save time, you save money, and our regenerative farms continue to grow. It's time to remove what does not belong. Rebuild with cleaner inputs. Support the farmers with the future in mind. This isn't a trend. It's a shift. We still have a voice. We still have a choice. To vote with our dollars for a healthier America today. Tap the link.
Are you ready to take your health back? At vandersteelhealth.com, I trust Purium's powerful superfoods to fuel my body with clean, plant-based nutrition. And in a world filled with toxins, Biomedic is designed to help support your body's natural detox process, even from glyphosate exposure. Real nutrition, targeted support, no junk. Go to vandersteelhealth.com and take control of your health today.